Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm absolutely flattered and honored because my understanding is you don't have a lot of speakers from Germany, and probably you never had one from Austria because I'm originally Austrian. So should I give a little background on my person before we go ahead? Yeah. I got my basic training at the University of Economics and Business Administration in Vienna. I started my career there and did my master's degree there, my doctorate, and then there's this third degree thing that we call habilitation. I think there's something similar here in France. Yeah. After that, I spent quite some time in the US. I was visiting scholar at the City University of New York at Baruch College, then in South Carolina at the University of South Carolina, and then I spent a year at Boise State University, which is a not really known university, but skiing is excellent in the area. So this was the kind of idea behind that. Yeah. You can only do that later on in your academic career. Before that, you have to choose locations very more systematic and academically driven. Then I went back after that time in the US to Vienna for a year and finally got appointed as chair of marketing at TU Dortmund University. Dortmund is located on the, relatively near to the Dutch border, so it's the northwest of Germany. So much on my background. My core research is from early on international marketing, international business, and over the time I also focused quite strongly on customer relationship management, and recently I also moved into collaboration with engineers, scholars from the engineering schools. There's also a reason behind that, because in engineering, these guys, they know how to attract big grants. They have to use a certain machinery, and if you kind of piggyback with them, no one really notices that the marketing people also get a nice share of funds. Yeah, so this is one of the reasons for that. And what I present today is actually a product or results of one of these collaborations. Here's my affiliation, and then you see the RIF, which is a spin-off of our university, and it's a transfer unit or a transfer institute that mainly focuses on applied research, or that takes ideas from the university and tries to develop products out of it, or to initiate startup companies. And I'm on the board of directors there, and it's a quite neat operation. We have depending on the development, between 100 and 140 people on our payroll. So it's not really that small. And Svenja is a doctoral student. She is in the last couple of months before graduating, and she basically, and the outcome that I present here goes basically, or has to do with her dissertation work. Robert is an engineer with a quality management background, and the same is true for Sandra. So please ask questions along, because we are such a small group, so don't hesitate if things pop up.
This
Yeah.
organization, is it a what we call a not-for-profit?
It's not for profit, but we try hard to use this environment to help startups that are aiming for profit. Yeah. We are also partly, but to a very small extent, funded by the federal government. So about 5% of our budget comes from there, and the rest is really coming from the market, collaborations with companies, collaboration with industry associations, and things like that. Yeah. You're welcome. Before I get started, let me just make sure that we are all on the same level of thinking in Germany. And my understanding is that in France, it's probably a little bit different. We differentiate between indirect export where a manufacturer sells to a local trader or agent, and this is actually what I will not focus at. And I will also not focus on direct export, where a manufacturer, in a lot of cases, in business-to-business contexts, sell directly to the buyer. Because a majority of small and medium-sized firms, not only in Germany, I think in all European countries, quite often use distributors in the local market, because that makes it easier. You have local know-how, etc., etc. Yeah? And it's actually not really risky, or not as risky as to do it directly. Yeah. This is actually what I have planned, and let me start out with pointing at the importance of exporting. It's obviously the most popular way to enter international markets. It's very important to pick the right partner. Yeah, we have tons of anecdotal evidence. If you go with the wrong agent, with the wrong distributor, chances are high that you will never make it into the market. And if you are entering a market and using the wrong partner, chances are high that you will never ever be able to move into that market again. So it's a kind of burnt soul thing, if you. What are the reasons for this popularity? Because the resources with small and medium-sized companies are not really there. So they are looking for efficient ways, for ways that are not really very risky. Yeah? And finally, and this was also a reason why we focused on that, we found only one study that was published in English, and it was done by my old friend Tamer Kavushkil. At that time, he was at Michigan State University. This study was published 23 years ago. Yeah? When I presented a shorter version of what I have brought with me today, last year, Claude Obadiah told me that he also did a study, but he just published it in French. So he had no access to that. So, you know, there's a lot of options for doing research here, because we don't have a lot of knowledge. What did we do? We started out with exploratory research case studies and used the case studies to identify criteria that are used by successful small and medium-sized exporters when they choose agents. based on that and on literature work, we embarked on an online survey in order to kind of generalize what we found in the case studies. Yeah? And those findings and the findings from the survey were then finally integrated in a decision support instrument that could be used by companies and would allow small and medium-sized companies to approach the selection process of an agent in a more structured way. Yeah? So it's an instrument that is now available, unfortunately, just in German, but I'm more than willing to provide the respective link so that you could probably translate it or transfer it to the French situation. Let me briefly focus on what we did so that you get an understanding of the quality of the research. We started out with 19 expert interviews with managing directors, sales managers in small and medium-sized companies. And the interviews were recorded, were then analyzed according to standard routines in qualitative research. And we combined the findings with the existing literature in other fields, because there is almost no research in the area of agent selection in export markets. And then we used that as an basis for our online review, and overall we could motivate 141 export managers, managers that were in charge for the international activities to respond to that questionnaire. And then we used structural equation modeling to find out which ones of the criteria really influence export performance. So this was the idea here. And in the final step, as I already explained, using quality management methods, this is where Robert and his people came in to develop a neat little structure. It's IT-based, so it's a neat little software that could be used. Yeah. I think I will skip the theoretical background. It's probably just interesting for you. What we did is we came up with, or we tried to identify certain theories that allowed us to kind of transfer findings from other areas to that area. Just to give you an example, there's this Uppsala model that basically tells us that companies move from their home market to markets that are nearby, that are very similar, and later on they expand step by step. Yeah? And this is a very basic model, and we could use it to come up with our hypothesis. Yeah? And the same is basically true with resource-based view and principal agent theory. Yeah? So we draw from different, very, very solid theories, concepts in order to develop our hypothesis in combination with what we found in the case study analysis. Here's a little overview on the 19 companies. So there is a certain mix of sectors, of types of industry. Then you see the number of employees. The biggest one is up here, almost 4,000 employees, which is not really a small or a medium-sized company anymore, but we had a chance to interview them, and it also tells you the position of the people that were willing. And after the interviews, we also collected secondary data, business reports, certain documents. In some cases, we were also shown the contracts with the agents, so to get a full picture in these 19 cases. Just an example to give you an idea what we did in each company. This is one of our partner companies in Dortmund, Toletzig. They are a medium-sized producer of lifting gears, slings, and cargo securing devices. So if you go out and go to one of these forwarding companies, or actually every kind of heavy transport has to use some equipment to secure the load, yeah? And they are producing that. Yeah? They started internationalization because the German market did not really offer a lot of additional opportunities, and they also felt when they are successful, internationally successful, this would also help to strengthen their market position in the German market. Yeah? So quite reasonable approach. And they started out according to the Upsilon model without referring to it, without even knowing about the model. But this is a kind of confirmation. And later on, they set up production facilities in Poland after the fall of the Iron Curtain, because the cost of labor is considerably lower in Poland. Then they set up one production site in China and later on in Chile, just to get a hold in South America. Here, the current export quota is 35%. They work with a lot of distribution partners. They are not using exclusive contracts, which is quite interesting, but also the majority of companies that we did case studies with are not really focusing on exclusive contracts, because they want to keep their agents, how should I say it, hungry, yeah? It's more competitive if you don't grant them exclusive rights, yeah? The core thing of the case research was basically in relation to the sales agent selection, and we've focused in the first step on what kind of sources do they use. And over the 19 cases, we got a pretty good understanding how successful companies really approach, or how they approach this information collection process. And then we asked about criteria, and we were not really surprised. In all 19 cases, there was no standard routine. Yeah? So depending on the experience of the leading guy or the leading guys, in a lot of cases, the owner, they had a rough idea, but there were no manuals, there were no predefined procedures for that, yeah? Which again kind of boosted our enthusiasm, because we had the feeling that we are doing meaningful things here. When we go back to Toletzig, it's basically the knowledge and mentality of the local partner they use as one of the core criteria, the network the partner has in the respective export market and the reputation, and then the fit of the product portfolio. So if this agent is already dealing with products that are related to transport, to security, to issues like that. And then trust, not really a surprise, is also of importance. Or in other words, it's not in a lot of cases always trust, because trust kind of evolves over time. So in the beginning, it's more a kind of fit of, how should I say? It's a fit of the way both parties approach business. Mindset, yeah. Mindset is probably a very, very good term for that. Okay, and in the dissertation work of Svenja, basically every case is presented within 5 to 10 pages. Yeah? So a very detailed description. After that, we embarked on a cross-case analysis. Yeah? And this is actually what we found out. Yeah, that it is a major challenge, and these are the 7 most relevant groups of criteria. Yeah? So it's local aspects, market proximity, know-how of the partner, resources of the partner, commitment, orientation, and sympathy, or again, this fit in the mindset. Yeah? I have, and also in her work, there are tons of citations that kind of back up what she identified. And just to, I really don't want to go through all of them, but just to give you an idea, going back to the local aspects, he has to have good knowledge of the language in any case, the culture in the export market. The most attractive ones are those that really have a long-standing experience in the respective market. Yeah? Or if we talk about resources, a very typical citation out of the interviews, case number 14. Question is, does he have an own distribution team? Does he have his own marketing opportunities? Is he able to promote the respective product? Yeah? Not really a surprise. Yeah, and then finally commitment, suitable orientation. Then it turns out that it reasonably takes shape. The empathical part works out, values, character, and so on fit together. So there's again this fit thing here, and finally sympathy. Just to throw in one of the anecdotes, because sympathy is a kind of soft criteria. One of the owners of the company we did an interview with said the final decision also is influenced by the reaction of his dog, believe it or not. So he's one of these typical hunting-oriented German guys, yeah, spending a lot of money with his hunting hobby, which is relatively expensive in Germany. And he has a dog that is basically part of the family and always present in the company. Yeah? So there's a neat little section in the office of the owner, and if the dog kind of reacts not in a too friendly way, they reconsider the decision whether this is the suitable agent, sales agent. Yeah? Believe it or not, yes. It tells you something. Yeah? No, it tells us exactly that this is a very challenging decision, and a lot of companies are struggling. They have no real grip on the problem, not a real handle on the problem. From here, we basically we developed measurements for these 7 facets of criteria, and we combined that with the respective theories, and came up with a first version of the questionnaire that was pre-tested in our marketing group, and then with 2 or 3 selected company representatives. So they went through it, they told us whether the questions make sense or not, or what we should adapt, or what they really did not like. And then we basically distributed the questionnaire as widely as possible, and finally we were able to get 141 participants. Companies in the sample spent on average 37 years on exporting, so they are not really novices. The average export rate in the sample is 51%. Again, an indication that the people know what they are kind of putting in the questionnaire. Number of employees, so it's a reasonably good representation of smaller and medium-sized companies, and most of the people that responded are responsible for the international or the export activities. I skipped all the hypothesis development. The idea was basically that we took the following selection criteria, and you might ask yourself, hey, where is number 7? Because I was always speaking about 7. We did not include the sympathy factor, because these are more or less hard facts. Yeah? And so we decided after some pre-testing that we'll kind of focus in an extra step on that, because it's way off from the overall idea of those selection criteria. We measured all those constructs with more than one question, so there were always 2, 3, 4, in some cases even 8 questions that kind of tried to capture business attitude, market proximity. Yeah? And this is basically the results. Yeah? And we focused with regard to business success on strategic success, which is a kind of prerequisite for financial success, and finally satisfaction with the agent. Yeah? And as you can see, the strategic success really influences financial success, influences satisfaction, and financial success also influences in a significant way satisfaction. If we go back to the selection criteria, it's interesting that not all of the constructs, the criteria that we used, obviously influence success. And what we did, once we had the results, we went back to some of the respondents. We were able to ask 7 or 8, if I remember correctly, to help us to make sense out of the findings. And what they told us is that business know-how And the knowledge about local aspects are a kind of hygiene factor. This is a kind of basic thing. Yeah? So we did, in our survey, we did not get a lot of variation. Yeah? So this was a kind of thing that they take for granted. Yeah? And therefore, it did not really explain things here. Yeah? And the message is that these criteria are still of importance, but they are of a different quality. They are what we call hygiene factors. Yeah? So they have to be there, otherwise possible sales agents would not be considered at all. Yeah? So this is the explanation for that. And again, this kind of gave us enough proof that we entered the next stage and developed certain checklists, yeah, using all the identified criteria. And here are screenshots of the instrument that was developed. Oops, why does it not work? No, sorry. The initial idea was that I should also be able to show you the other screenshots, but probably here the slide helps to explain what the instrument is able to do, what it provides for small and medium-sized companies. It's first of all a stepwise procedure. In the first step, it provides a self-assessment of the company, yeah, or the manager that uses that. And the idea is to give the person some self-provided feedback, yeah, self-assessment of the abilities to select a partner. Yeah? And if they are not scoring very high on that, the recommendation would be that they should think about their internal processes or their procedures when they think about exporting. Yeah? So the idea is look at yourself first, get an idea whether you are in a good position or not. Yeah? And then in the next step, it's again three aspects. It's first of all KO criteria, because it does not really make a lot of sense if you have, for example, 6 or 7 possible agents in Brazil, for example, to check all the details right from the beginning. Just use some key criteria to say yes or no. Yeah? And that makes your job easier, because then you have finally 3 left, and this pays off to assess those in more detail. So it's this, what we called KO criteria, yes or no filtering, and then it's a detailed assessment where you basically, here I have it. Here you basically see the respective ratings, how well, it's an example from market proximity. I fear it's probably too small. So this is one area, it's market proximity, and then it's differentiated between network and reputation and industry and market experience, and you basically rank the respective possible or probable partner according a scale from does not really apply up to 0, 1, and 2. So this would be a first step. Then you basically go through the whole list of criteria, and it's possible to get scores for each agent. And if you really want to be more refined, you could also put in a weighting component. So it's not just only rating, you could also weight. You could say market proximity is, from our perspective, much more important than resources. Let me briefly go back here. And then, in the third step, gut feeling, the kind of mindset, how you call it, the kind of sympathy thing, intuition, yeah, reaction of the dog, if you, if you like. And this, we just put that in because everyone does that. We just put it in the kind of checklist to make sure that it also gains attention. Yeah, and the outcome is basically that you get scores on your in-house know-how through the self-assessment, and with regard to partner selection, so the kind of selection process, if you did that in a meaningful way, and finally the partner attractiveness. And we, you know, the whole thing was funded by a grant from the German government, from one of the research funding institutions. And this funding institution is solely focused on applied research. So we would not have got the grant if we would have applied just from the university side. But the kind of the transfer institute, the RIF, they took the lead position, and so we got the grant. And one of the prerequisites to get a grant is that you set up a group of companies that kind of monitor and help to proceed with the research. Yeah? And we had overall 9 companies in this body, kind of monitoring board. And then we showed them the result and asked them to use it. Yeah? And we got actually quite positive feedback. Only 2 companies or 2 people from companies that, guys, this is typical for you from academia. This is way too complex. This is way too much effort. We kind of do it the old way. But the other 7 were pretty convinced, and we got reasonable good feedback. Okay, this is basically what I brought with me. Brief sum up. The fundamental results are what we did not really see right from the beginning is that there is no shortage of potential distribution partners. So obviously, German, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for French, smaller, medium-sized companies who have a certain expertise are, if I would overdo it a little bit, are bombarded by by
Request.
requests by, thank you, from certain countries. Yeah? And this is especially true when they go to certain international fairs and trade shows, because then this is where they constantly get people from Brazil or from Argentina that ask me, hey, are you not interested in working with us? So this, we have very good proof on that. Then commitment, as it turned out with the online review, is the most important driver, and sympathy, this fit of the mindset, are of core relevance. The theoretical contribution, which is also important, at least from the perspective of the university, is that we now have a better understanding of the selection process in companies, and we were able, with the online review, to come up with identification of the importance of the weighting of selection criteria. And with regard to the practical side, we came up with this instrument that I demonstrated. Yeah, thanks for suffering through with me. This is basically what I'll skip that, what I prepared here. I hope I did not take too long.
Thank you.
Thank you.